Howdy ho, and welcome back to Bumblebee Wild West Edition, where we take to the dry plains in order to count down our top 10 Wild West stories that sound made up but are 100% real. To start off, our list will be the truest danger, the one great menace. Number 10 is the Red Ghost. The stories from the 1880s of the 30-foot beast called the Red Ghost wreaking havoc in Arizona territory seemed like something of a nightmare. A heinous devil who allegedly trampled one woman and ate a grizzly bear. When miners spotted the Red Ghost and fired at it, a human skull apparently fell from the creature's back. The Red Ghost turns out was actually a feral camel. That story culminates with a farmer popping it while it ate tomatoes. You may be wondering, a camel on the American frontier? Was this normal? Is there a piece of history you are missing? No. See, in 1855, Secretary of War Jefferson Davis got it in his thick head that camels would be essential to America's westward expansion and that the wide open spaces of the West were well suited for camels. Fun fact, just because the ground is flat here and it's flat where they live doesn't make the habitat interchangeable. But this isn't about logic, it's about war camels, and the government allocated $30,000 for the purchase and importation of camels to be employed for military purposes. The US Army traveled to the Middle East, purchased 75 camels, believing they could carry supplies and personnel long distance to remote destinations. After bringing the herd of camels to Camp Verde in Texas, they were used to travel to and from San Antonio. Then the herd was split when 24 camels are sent to California for an expedition when they ate it unsuccessfully. When back in Texas, the rest are killing the game at their camel duties. However, when the Civil War ended, soldiers and government alike had no idea what to do with the camels, so they just released them into the wild. Some were caught and then sold at auction, some were sold for racing in Sacramento, others wandered down to Mexico where there's at least one account of a Confederate soldier pushing a camel off a cliff, which is just so rude and unnecessary. From there, commercially imported camels began mating with the army ones, and the story just gets a lot murkier as to where the camels all end up. But sightings of wild camels continued well into the 20th century. Number 9, we get to hear the twists and turns of the mystery meat. So, in spring of 1874, Alfred Packer stumbled onto what is called Colorado's Los Pinos Indian Agency with a twisted tale. His 5 comrades, Shannon Bell, James Humphrey, Frank Miller, George Noon, and Israel Swan, had made a prospecting trip in December of 1873, ignoring the advice of Chief Ore, who had told them to postpone their journey until spring, but the men ignored the advice. Lo and behold, by February, the men are out of food. Alone in the wilderness and trapped in heavy snow, they resorted to boiling their moccasins for food. After a few days, even that ran out. And that's when Bell came after Packer. Waking from a dead sleep, Packer fights off his maddened friend and in self-defense, only to see that Bell had already taken out all the others, one of whom had all the skin and muscles stripped from his leg. Packer said he's now forced to eat the meat of the others or otherwise starve, and it's only once winter passes and spring breaches that he finds his way to the closest settlement. People there did not believe him, though, that he hadn't been the one to take out all the other men. In April, Packer was tried in court where he was unable to prove that he hadn't except for Bell, which he claimed was self-defense, and he's sentenced. Packer, who'd already been through enough isolation, said no thanks and just vanished for 9 years. When he was found, though, Packer was given a new trial in Lake City, near the site of the killings themselves, and was sentenced to 40 years in state penitentiary. He served 15 years and was released on parole. In 1950, according to the Colorado Life magazine, a hand arm was found near the campsite where the drama went down. It wasn't until 1994 it was verified as Packer's, and it had 3 of the 5 bullets missing, just like Packer said it was when he explained how he shot at Bell. Packer was pardoned, and today the University of Colorado at Boulder's Cafe is named for him. Just don't order the mystery meat. Number 8 is the story of a famous name with a Little herd title. It's Little Sure Shot. Chief Sitting Bull was the leader of the Lakota who helped defeat General George Custer at Little Bighorn. But even the remarkably talented Sitting Bull was impressed with good old Annie Oakley's sharpshooting. In 1884, Sitting Bull was watching Oakley perform in Minnesota and was awed by the girl being blessed by our creator with such talent. After seeing the show, the chief excitedly sent $65 to Oakley's hotel room hoping for a signed autograph, but Oakley rejected the offer. Don't worry, this isn't one of those snub things. In fact, she did the opposite. She asked him to come have a meeting with her as she was equally impressed by the man. Oakley herself later recalled, "The old man was so pleased with me, he insisted upon adopting me. And that is when I was christened with Tanya Cecilia, or Little Sure Shot." Sitting Bull and Annie Oakley would continue to get to know each other better and better better as part of Buffalo Bill's Cody's Wild West show, where their relationship became one like family. He is a dear, faithful old friend, and I have great respect and affection for him, Oakley wrote. Pretty cute, feel-good story. Number 7, Rocky Mountain oysters. Oh my sweet summer child. Do not order that off a menu if you do not know what it means, thinking you're getting your usual serving of oceanic snot rocks. This title is a fun little way for me to tell you about how in 1871, 2 men died over an advertisement featuring a comically well-endowed bull. See, the 2 proprietors of the Bull's Head Saloon get it in their heads that that image would be the perfect thing to slap on the side of their very public building at a dimension of like 20 feet by 20 feet. Yeah, no, the town flew into an outrage and enlisted the help of the city marshal, Wild Bill Hickok, to remove it. Hickok, who found it kind of funny himself like most of the men in town, tried to talk reason with, women, youths, it's not appropriate, the whole mix, but the owners were adamant about their giant bull staying up, so Hickok took it upon himself to remove the mural and enrage the saloon owners in the process. In an attempt to intimidate Hickok, one of the owners told him he could kill a crow on the wing. Hickok, like in a western, dramatically takes his hat off and through squinted eyes drops what would become one of the most famous sayings in the West. Did the crow have a firearm? Was he shooting back? I will be. Owners didn't take that serious. They also had never heard the whole don't attack someone whose back is to you thing, because later that day when Hickok was doing his own thing, the owners very suddenly tried to pop him. Hickok, a very famous slinger, whips around and pops them both in return. This is where the story turns tragic. Seeing a figure running towards him from the corner of his eye, Hickok reactively turns and fires, only to accidentally best friend, Special Deputy Marshal Mike Williams. The accident would go on to haunt him for the rest of his days. Number 6 is how you should definitely bring a knife to an arms fight. Oh yeah, it's my boy Geronimo, one of the most complicated uncles to ever roam the land. His true name was Goyakla, a cruel and quick-tempered type, but also traumatized and ambivalent. His contradictory yet immensely effective nature makes him one of the most fascinating characters of the Apache Wars. But long before he became the leader of the Apache, Goyakla didn't know how to use a firearm. So instead, he used a daring method to go after the soldiers who had his wife, mother, and family in a raid when he was young. Goyakla was never able to forgive this atrocity, and when he sought to ease his pain, resting deep within the lands atop Bowie Peak, he heard the voice of Usan, the ancestor, who whispered upon the wind that you will never die in battle, nor will you die by weapon. I will guide your arrows. And so it became time that Goyakla, with a spiritual Kevlar now in place, to hunt his family's devote his life to avenging them. So that's when Goyakla is duking it out with Mexican soldiers, knowing the decree of his ancestor. He forgoes raining arrows upon them and instead just rushes them at full speed on horseback in a zigzag pattern to throw off their shots until he's close enough to cut them down. Goyakla steals their firearms and hightails it back to the Apache camp, and this is how it became his signature pattern, and also how the Apache learned to use the firearm. But how did Goyakla become, well, Geronimo? That iconic zigzag run. He repeated that pattern so many times that the Mexican soldiers start yelling Geronimo to warn each other when he came charging. The Chiriaca Apache take this as a title and began to chant the name in enthusiasm and intimidation. On to number 5, it's for some pretty close cousins. Cue the nervous laughter, because suffice to say it, Clara Dietrich and Ora Chatfield were more than close. It's something we know thanks to an article that circled Colorado newspapers on September 17th of 1889, which goes a little like this. An extraordinary elopement. Elopements of persons of opposite sexes are common enough all over the world. Just a brief pause to remind you guys that in the Wild West it was super cool to just be gay and get married. Cowboys even married each other. But did you, asks the New York correspondent of Melbourne Age, hear of 2 of a kind that fell in love and ran away? Such a thing has actually happened in Colorado, where 2 girls have fallen madly in love with each other in consequence of parental opposition to their living together and have taken themselves to parts unknown. They are Miss Ora Chatfield and Miss Clara Dietrich, the latter the older of the 2. Love letters of the most gushing character have been passed between the 2, and a few days ago when the 2 were ruthlessly separated, the latter had a severe attack of nervous prostration, and neither would be comforted. What makes the case more interesting is that both are women of intelligence, and not at all given the novel reading or romantic ideas in general. The younger woman's father has been the cruel parent who endeavored to separate the lovers. He has caused warrants to be issued for the arrest of both, with a view of investigating their sanity, but up to date has been unable to find them. It's often enough the case that girls girls have sentimental attachment for each other, but it does not take the shape of this present case, which seems to be out of ordinary run. The girls, who were nieces of an esteemed Leadville city councilman and Colorado State Assembly member, who ends up actually being successful in his mission. When the girls are found, warrants are served, and they are separated. There's no happy ending to this story, as Clara tearfully promised to let go of her young cousin wife. The women remained separated and each respectively married men. Number 4 is the TTC, aka train tip crash. So, in the 1890s, having woken up one lovely morning with the right douse of the sillies, railroad titan William Crush decided that for pure entertainment value, he is going to crash the tip of 2 trains together to just see what happens. This plan becomes a reality in the pop-up town of Crush, Texas on September 15th of 1896. This dude rounds up 40,000 equally bored and ornery people and temporarily makes the state's second biggest city. The Galveston Daily News reported it was everyone from artisans to clerks to doctors, representing all classes, ages, and genders of society. So, at 5 p.m. the little foot happens and the trains start. The conductors leave the bricks on the gas pedals and throw themselves out of the windows, the first indication that this is already a terrible plan. The trains slam into each other at 50 miles per hour with the massive crowd only about a dozen feet away, who I'll let describe the chaos that occurred. A sound of timbers and rent and torn, and then came a shower of splinters, reported one witness. There was just a swift instance of silence, and then, as if controlled by a single impulse, both broilers exploded simultaneously, and the air was filled with flying missiles of iron and steel varying in size from a postage stamp to a half a driving wheel, falling indiscriminately on just and unjust, the rich, the poor, the great and the small, states another. 2 people died, folks lost limbs and chunks of skin, and thousands were hit with flying detritus. A photographer who snapped pictures of the event lost an eye. As for the event's organizer, the railroad company fired him, but the publicity poured in from the event, which made headlines around the world, so the company rehired him, and the lesson never got learned. Need a refreshing pick-me-up? Well, number 3 is tarantula juice, which in the Wild West, it's fair to assume meant like actual tarantula juice. Rest assured, however, they aren't wringing out giant spiders like rags over a sieve. The reality is somehow actually worse, though. Cowboys, prospectors, and miners, they weren't too picky about their beverages. The baseline is that I needed to get them as drunk as they could possibly be, as fast as it could happen. At one saloon in Sierra Nevada, a clever bartender was short on materials for his demanding crowd, so he did the Mom Wednesday dinner special of opening the pantry and just combining everything he found inside. Pouring some up, the cowboys and miners and slingers alike, they all love the stuff, even despite some creepy crawly side effects. This is the start of saloons selling tarantula juice, which contains strict and a wood grain alcohol which was distilled from turb. So, what's tarantula juice's side effects? Well, the strict gave them a burst of energy, but I mean, as the body processed this modge podge of liquor and substances, their skin would begin to crawl as though tarantulas were running up and down their body. Sometimes if you drank enough, your skin would be visibly twitching. That sensation was often followed by muscle spasms, and then lockjaw, because that's what you want when you need to yak up spider juice. Number 2 requires you RSVP to what must have been the world's most tasteless invite. In 1899, a disgruntled Arizona railroad employee, George Smiley, was tired of all the back pay, but when his foreman wouldn't pony up the cash, Smiley just blew the dude away. Seems to be the common problem-solving consensus of the time. Unfortunately for him, he chose the wrong time. A new sheriff, Frank Watron, had been appointed and was eager as hell to make himself into a hard not meant to be effed with. So when the verdict came out that Smiley was to be put to death, Frank pulls out the cardstock and the Crayolas and makes 50 super fancy invitations reading the following. You are hereby cordially invited to attend the death of one George Smiley. His soul will be swung into eternity on December 8th of 1899 at 2:00 p.m. sharp. Latest improved methods of scientific strangulation will be employed, and everything possible will be done to make the proceedings cheerful and death a success. Yep, pretty tasteless. Bet Smiley turned into Frowny at that one. This invite was so rough that it finds its way to the White House, where the President William McKinney demanded it be changed. A second, rather sarcastic invitation was issued by Watron, wherein the message was changed to, with feelings of profound sorrow and regret, I hereby invite you to attend and witness the private, decent, and humane death of a human being named George Smiley. The said George Smiley will be sentenced on January 8th, 1900. You're expected to deport yourself in a respectful manner, and any flippant or unseemly language or conduct on your part will not be allowed. Conduct on anyone's part bordering on ribaldry and tending to mar the solemnity of the occasion will not be tolerated. Number 1, under the floorboards. This story begins in 1870 when a prospector was making his way through the lonely mountains of New Mexico and came across a stout wooden cabin at the foot of Palo Flechado Pass. Needing some rest, he approaches and meets the owner of the cabin, Charles Kennedy. As Kennedy's wife, an Ute woman, served dinner, dinner, the traveler, making conversation, asked the couple's son if there was any other indigenous people nearby. The boy looked back at him for a moment and then answered, "Can't you smell the one Papa put under the floor?" The unfortunate traveler had stumbled into the lair of one of the West's most notorious who ended the lives of 14 people at his isolated homestead. After adding the traveler to that list, Kennedy also son for the slip-up. Kennedy's wife considers that the end of the line, leaves the home, and walks all the way to Elizabethtown, where she makes a full confession. After unearthing the grisly evidence, the townsfolk dragged Kennedy behind a horse until he died, and then staked his head outside the local inn. Meanwhile, the leader of the mob that butchered Charles Kennedy was Clay Allison, a violent local vigilante who definitely racked up a higher body count than the serial slayer he beheaded. On one occasion, he tried to settle a petty dispute with a neighbor by digging a grave and proposing they had a knife fight inside of it, thus saving the effort of moving the loser's body. Allison gained notoriety as one of the deadliest participants in the Colfax Country War, a massive land dispute that caused 200 deaths. A war that was started because Allison constable, and when the constable's uncle came a-knocking for revenge, Allison got the drop on him and popped him in the local saloon. After that, in a shot of tarantula juice, Allison reportedly stripped naked, tied a red ribbon around his bits, and did a war dance around the crime scene and the still twitching corpse. Thank you once again for tuning in, and I sure hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more from us, and until next time, which story do you think was the craziest? Comment down below.